This is the TB8 or TB8 TKL, made by TechBear Studios. For the sake of transparency, NLandkeys sent me this review unit for free to make this video. And I'm very thankful for the opportunity as a small content creator, but I want to try and provide an unbiased take on this board and not only talk about the good things about this board. At first glance, the design looks rather simple from the outside. From all around we can see a simple box on wedge design with a steep bevel or chamfer on the top and bottom of the top piece, giving it a kind of two-tone look to it. This is the anodized deep green color from NLandkeys with the Brilliance yellow weight and badge, which have a matching design or shape to it. And the Brilliance term is actually very different from what I thought it would be. It has a matte, almost plasticky look to it, which isn't what is implied by the word Brilliance in my opinion. Honestly, it kind of looks like the design was printed and stuck on there, but I don't really know the process they used to get the design and color on there. But the GeekHack page calls it an extremely intricate back treatment process. If anyone has more insight into that, let me know. Probably just a detail that doesn't have the best translation. However, this weight is an extra $28 from NLandkeys because it's made out of brass, whereas the water ripple weight is made of aluminum and the PVD weight is made of stainless steel. Brass, being a heavier weight, usually helps the board sound a little more fuller. With the Brilliance weight, the full build weighs in at about 2.8 kilos or about 6 pounds. A front height of 20mm without the case feed install makes it feel like it's on the taller side, but a 7-degree typing angle is pretty common from what I've seen and feels really familiar. On the inside, it's very similar to the Cycle 7 with the ball latch system that makes disassembly really easy, the built-in force brake nubs, recessed slots for the gasket beans and gasket strips, and also the sides of the bottom piece are just gone. Underneath this aluminum cover is the slot for the batteries if you buy the wireless PCB. I have batteries in here, but I don't have the wireless PCB, so I can't test any of the functionalities of that. I asked for a 1.6mm wired one instead. So if you buy a TB8 with a wireless PCB, you will get the batteries inside, but if you buy a TB8 with a wired PCB, you will have foam in here instead. The top piece has a diffuser for the LEDs, and it has the badge which can be removed and swapped out if you want. This board also comes with 2 foam pieces that can go around the LEDs to prevent light from bleeding out, and there's also the mounting holes for a top mount configuration. So the TB8 has 3 different mounting styles: gasket beans, gasket strips, and it also has an option for top mount. Gasket beans are inserted into the plate tabs and offer a bit more bounce. It's hardly a noticeable amount. You're not going to see the whole PCB assembly bouncing, but it's more nuanced and just feels softer compared to the gasket strips. The gasket strips, which go on the plate tabs, offer a more stiff or firm typing experience compared to the gasket beans, but also surprisingly quieter in my experience. You might notice that in the sound test. The top mount configuration is kind of interesting. It doesn't exactly mount like a traditional top mount because the screws are actually a bit too long just to screw the plate to the top piece alone. You have to place the gasket strips on the plate tabs and then screw the plate into the top piece. It's basically the same idea as Mode's isolated top mount, which you can find in their Sonnet keyboard, but the gasket here is a lot thicker than the one used in the Mode boards. This makes the typing feel not as stiff as it might be with a traditional top mount, but it feels quite similar to just using the gasket strips alone. It's a bit louder and also mitigates some of that typical top mount sound. But using this board in a top mount configuration also makes it difficult to disassemble. Normally with any other board that uses the ball latch, you can just press down on the keycaps and lift the top piece off easily. But since the plate and PCB are mounted to the top piece, you can't really do that. You basically have to pull apart the top side first, and then you can pull the bottom side up, or you can do this thing where you kind of shake it down and the weight of the bottom piece might be enough to unlatch from the top piece. Pulling out from the bottom piece can be a hassle since you kind of have to play with how you pull it off at an angle. You might want to test to see if you can pry it apart without touching the inside of the case before trying the top mount. The actual way you're supposed to do it is take out the switch and cap from the caps lock and page down keys and thread these long screws through. You can push on these screws and then pulling the top piece off is easy. It's just a little more time consuming than my method, but definitely safer for the board. It probably is a little faster than flipping the board around and taking out like 4 screws to take the case apart, at least like you normally would if you didn't have a ball latch for the case. So I guess it's kinda nice to have this option too. You can tighten or loosen the ball bearings holding the case together with this screw. Be careful not to over tighten it. Hopefully these are all tightened to the same degree in the overall QC. I didn't have any problems with mine at least, but something to be mindful for when you build it for the first time. The TB8 TKL also comes with the standard plate foam, PE foam, and case foam you typically find in most budget boards around this price range. The case foam it comes with has a bit of texture to it and is more porous. If you open up the case and look at the side, you'll see that the PCB sits really close to the bottom of the case. The case foam is thick enough just for the PCB to be resting on the case foam instead of the gaskets. After recording some sound tests, the difference was kind of surprising, honestly. Have a listen. This board starts at $184 before shipping at NLandkeys, and it's honestly a great price, and another step towards making better boards for lower prices as we've continually seen over the past few years now. Especially when you consider TKLs typically cost more than smaller boards of similar quality, simply because there's more material being used. I've compared the TB8 to the Cycle 7 because the design is pretty similar, and honestly, it could pass off as a Cycle 8 as much as the actual Cycle 8 could. Just based off the Cycle 7, I think the Cycle 8 will also be a great value board, but the TB8 is just too similar not to consider in my opinion if you're looking to buy a value TKL this year. The anodization on the TB8 looks incredibly good as my Cycle 7 with no visible banding, and it's super smooth. For those that didn't look into the Cycle 7 reviews, everyone listed anodization on it between the colors and the quality of it. I personally haven't seen an anodization that's better quality on a keyboard than on the TB8 or the Cycle 7. For the sound test, I have an uncut aluminum plate and a flex cut FR4 plate. I want to describe the sound as I hear it simply because you can't hear everything from just a sound test. The aluminum plate has a bit of a harsh sound to it that's rounded out by the gaskets. There's a tiny bit of resonance, though I wouldn't say it's hollow sounding. It's a pretty typical sound of an aluminum plate, I would say, not too clacky and not really a thocky sound. It's a plate material that's practically a standard option for a reason. The FR4 plate with flex cuts has a much softer sound and a softer typing experience. Even though I have a non-flex cut PCB, the flex cuts on the plate make it sound a little thinner and a little quieter, but definitely not as much as a flex cut PCB. I didn't hear any resonance when I typed on it, and I personally like the FR4 flex cut plate over the uncut aluminum plate simply just for that reason. Now, because there are flex cuts on the FR4 plate, it does balance out the sound to where the alphas sound very consistent in each row, whereas on the non-flex cut aluminum plate, there's more variance between the left and right side of the alphas or the top and bottom row of the alphas. And typically people don't really care so much for the inconsistencies in sound because it all averages out in the end when you're typing on it. And the other option is having flex cuts, which makes everything sound thinner and more homogeneous, similar to what foam does, except it's at a higher pitch basically. Based off what I heard while recording the sound test, I would be interested in seeing if the flex cut aluminum plate that's offered for the TB8 gave a more balanced sound that's less harsh and more consistent across the alphas. Otherwise, I would typically prefer a palm or PP plate if that was available. The only gripes I have with this board are that the Berlin switch look kinda dull, though it might be something you like if you don't want something super shiny on the back of your keyboard. And taking the case apart while in top mount is kind of annoying sometimes, but it's not that bad. It's nice to have the top mount included, but it definitely feels kinda like an afterthought here. In terms of overall sound of the board, I feel like all three different mounts sound different enough from each other that you could fine-tune the board to your liking with or without the foam involved, but you might find a bigger difference in sound by switching the switches rather than the mounts, or maybe even by switching the plate material. The different mounts might have a more noticeable change to the typing feel, with the gasket beans feeling softer and the gasket strips or isolated top mount feeling firmer. The build quality is great and on par with any other big keyboard manufacturers. So I think TechBear Studios is a manufacturer we can look forward to in the future for making great keyboards at an affordable price.